Okie dokie. I think we're live. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. That's always the first protocol on a live, right? Because there's not much point in continuing if you can't hear me. So as soon as I see a thumbs up, and I know there's always a lag time, I shall continue. See how we get on. I've got my chamomile tea, which, antihistamine. So I'm a bit concerned nobody's, there we go, we've got a thumbs up. Yay! All right, we're good to go. All right, tonight, after my video, if you didn't see it last week on MCAS, Mast Cell Activation Syndrome, I've been doing a deep dive into this because I think I've got it. And I'd say very specifically, thanks, Mum, very specifically, I've got this. And the more I connect the dots with it, the more I'm like, so many answers. And I still I'm guessing am the tip of the iceberg of what I know about it. But half of learning for me is being able to share it with you, because as I share it with you, I learn it myself. So that's why I do this. That's why I have this channel, because it helps me to learn for myself, right? So I did a slideshow simply to remind myself, because I don't remember all this stuff when I first learned it. It takes me a while to sink in, and there's an MCAS reason for that. So I'm going to share my screen so we can get into it. Where are we? I'm going to find. Here we go. All right. Okay, so I am going to. It's been a while since I've done a slideshow, so I just don't remember. All right, MCAS symptoms, the 10 most common in lipedema, which is, why we want to know, right? All right, in case you're new around here, I'm Kylie. Here is my dossier from your perspective. I have Hashimoto's. I've had a hysterectomy. I have lipedema. I had a double knee replacement. I had a gastric sleeve. I have had lipedema arm surgery, a lower body lift, a face and neck lift, and just recently a breast and side lift. And now I'm adding to that MCAS, although I haven't had the official blood testing for this yet. I'm just going through that now, but it's a bit like lipedema, right? Once you go through the symptoms, you're sort of like, oh yeah, I've got every one of those. So I'm going to add that to my little resume here, which is not the best kind of resume to have, but it is what it is, right? Okay, and I'm 55, just so you know. And if you want to look at this picture, it was only about 3.5, 4 years ago. So I put this up here to show you that you can come back from things, and in a relatively short amount of time. So if you consider I'm 55 years old and this was only 3 years ago, it's never too late, right? So that's why I put that there. Okay, disclaimer. Don't just listen to anyone on YouTube. Do your own research, get your inspiration here, but go off and put your big girl panties on and go and talk to whoever you need to talk to get this, on the road for you. Okay, what is MCAS? MCAS is Mast Cell Activation Syndrome. Okay, and I've always kind of known about this, but not really dug into it. So, because there's so many things in the health world that you can dig into, right? So for the first, probably 10 or 15 years of my learning journey, I was all in on thyroid disease until I learned about lipedema. And then I'm like, so then I'm all in on lipedema and everything to do with lipedema. And MCAS, Mast Cell Activation Syndrome, is very definitely part of the lipedema, world, I'm going to say. So mast cells, which are in our immune system, they live in our connective tissue as well. They cause chronic inflammation when they're on fire and when they're, a little bit out of control, and causes a series of reactions, right? So when they're under fire, they release histamines. So I did a video a little while back on histamines, but I still hadn't connected the dots, because you have to go down the rabbit hole, right? And until you connect the dots personally, you don't kind of really understand the implications of it. So I knew that there was a histamine response going on in my body, but I didn't really understand that it came from the mast cells. Okay, so that's where we're at. That's where I'm at anyway. All right, let's get on to symptom number 1, skin flushing. Okay, so mast cells release histamines when they're triggered, right? So the histamines, and that causes the blood vessels near the skin surface to dilate rapidly. So that's the flushing that you see and feel. All right. So the triggers can be anything: heat, cold, exercise, stress, fragrances. It's why it's so confusing, and it's what makes it so hard to pinpoint what a mast cell activation symptom is, because they're just so many different things, right? Um, Hives, also known as urticaria, and this is very common in hyperthyroidism as well. Um, they're a visible reaction to histamines, okay, and they can appear in as little and disappear in as little as hours and minutes, even. Okay, so this skin flushing and hives is underdiagnosed in lipedema because the skin's already sensitive. So it's sort of like often thought of as something different, or it's part of the sensitivity, and it's not always. It is, just a different form of trigger. And it's commonly misdiagnosed as rosacea, hot flushes, so my perimenopause, menopause friends, or anxiety type blushing. So, when you get anxious and you blush, if you're that kind of a blusher, then that can be caused by mast cells being triggered by cortisol, because you're stressed in the moment, right? So go figure, right? Okay, let's go on to the next one, and that is bloating and gut chaos. Okay, so the gut wall is another place that there's a high concentration of mast cells, okay, because it's our immune system essentially. So MCAS in the gut causes leaky gut. So if we've got too much going on, it can cause cramping and irregular bowel habits. So going from constipation and diarrhea, like to diarrhea, backwards and forwards on any given day, often misdiagnosed as IBS, which makes sense that that would be the case, right? However, they the root cause could well be mast cell activation, being triggered one day to do one thing and being triggered another day to do another. It's why symptoms can be all over the place, and you have IBS symptoms today, but you don't have it tomorrow. Depends on your triggers, right? And whether or not you've eaten, consumed, worn, put on your skin, breathed in, whatever your triggers are. Okay. And it also depends on when you get to a trigger load where you might be able to cope with one or two things, different things, but then you keep adding them one on top of the other, and you might have a day where you've just got a full load of triggers and you'll have all the symptoms under the sun, IBS being potentially one of them. Um, we take antihistamines in this respect, but in a lot of cases with MCAS, however, it paralyzes the gut. So to stop the reaction. So it's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a blessing and a curse all in one thing. So, and the video that I did on histamines and antihistamines showed that long-term use of antihistamines actually can cause weight gain because of the paralysis of the gut. So it's kind of like a really tricky road to navigate, that one. Okay, food reactions that can cause bloating and gut chaos in mast cell activation syndrome. They're not the same as true allergies, right? People go, oh no, I've got all these allergies. And the reason how you know this is that they can be different every day, right? One day you might be able to have coffee, no problem. The next day you cannot. You get a woozy feeling afterwards, or you get that distinct vertigo-y feeling, or you get a headache, or like there's and you can't quite figure it out. And I get that with coffee. Some days I'm like fine with coffee, and other days I think, oh, I'm feeling a bit weird after that coffee. Is it because I've had it from this particular coffee shop? Are their beans moldy and therefore it's caused a trigger? Like there's all kinds of things that you can go down there. But I always look at, okay, keep a kind of a diary and pay attention to when you don't feel quite right, and see if you can find a pattern with mast cell activation. All right, so that is number two. Okay, let's go to number three, fatigue. Now, this is not fatigue as in thyroid fatigue. This is fatigue for no good reason. Like it doesn't go with what kind of activity. Sorry, I'm just moving something else over here. So it doesn't match what you've been doing. So if you're really, really fatigued, but you haven't done, a 10,000K walk that day, or, you haven't been just going crazy doing stuff, it's that kind of fatigue. It's fatigue. You've got no idea why you should be fatigued, right? So mast cell activation syndrome is a constant drain on the immune system. It's exhausting to the body, right? Because you're constantly on high alert. You're constantly on fight or flight, and that is exhausting to the body. Um, so mast cell mediators include histamines, cytokines, prostaglandins, and they all contribute to systemic inflammation. They're actually all working to try and keep your body in balance. So our body is really smart given the ideal situation, but even when it's not given the ideal situation, it spends a lot of time just trying to keep our body in homeostasis. It'll rob Peter to pay Paul in our system to keep things in balance and to keep us alive as best it can, right? That's exhausting. That's exhausting for the body. So, right. Um, this can also be misdiagnosed as chronic fatigue syndrome, burnout, and depression. And remember, this is a fatigue that doesn't respond to sleep. You can have as much sleep as you like and still feel fatigued. Then I'd probably look to MCAS as a potential reason for that, especially if you've got lipedema, which is clearly probably why you're here. All right, so number 4, we have sensitivities. Um, Hang on, let me go back one. Have I missed one here? There we go. No, I haven't. I have. There we go. I've missed one here. Brain fog. Okay, so mast cells exist, and this one's really relevant to me. Hey, mast cells exist in the brain. They cross the blood-brain barrier. Okay, so they release inflammatory mediators directly into our central nervous system. So histamines that the mast cells release when they're triggered can disrupt neurotransmitter signaling. So that affects memory, processing, and verbal recall. You know how you can't remember that word, or you can't remember what you're going to say, or you lose your track of thought in the middle of a sentence and that kind of thing? That can be mast cells firing off and depositing histamines in your brain. So this type of brain fog comes in waves. So some days you can be really switched on, and other days you're like, oh God, I can't say things clearly today. I can't speak clearly. I can't, have that memory recall of what I want to say very clearly. And it comes in waves because it depends on what you've been triggered with that particular day. Did you put on perfume that morning that really, triggers you? Did you use washing powder? Did you clean the house with cleaners? Did you have, whatever it is for breakfast that really doesn't agree with you? And that load just continued to pile up until you've got histamines flying all over the place. And I look at that and I go, oh, the brain fog coming in waves. I'm like, that can be me. Some days I think, God, I can't function. I can't get my words out. And yeah, this could very clearly be it. Perimenopause and menopause can make it worse because of the estrogen fluctuations during this time. And the estrogen can trigger mast cells. Okay, I put that on my last video because there's estrogen receptors on the mast cells. See, my memory worked then. And this type of brain fog often is misdiagnosed as anxiety, ADHD, and menopause symptoms. Okay, so you can see on every level that we go through here, every symptom, there's a way of being misdiagnosed as something else. That's why this is so tricky to figure out. So this is why it's up to us to keep the track, to keep the diary of when we're triggered, when we have these moments, when we have little symptoms that come up for us that we're like, oh God, that's just so annoying, or that's, driving me crazy, or whatever it is. It's up to us to keep track of this and present it to our doctor and say, look, I think I might have mast cell activation syndrome. And there are blood tests to say for sure that we have this. I'm going to look into that. So that would be my thought process there. All right, number 5, sensitivities. And we will go here. All right, so these are not true allergies, as I said earlier. Okay, because a lot of people will go and get tested for this because they feel so horrible after eating, say, peanuts, right? You feel horrible after eating peanuts. Peanuts are a high mold item, right? They can cause a histamine response, something shocking. You'll get a test result back saying, no, 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 negative, you're not allergic to peanuts. And you're just like, I know I have an issue with peanuts. That's just as an example. So MCAS sensitivities don't show up as an allergy. They're just a reaction, and you don't get that reaction every single time you have it. So reactions will be threshold dependent. Again, we've already spoken about this. Have you loaded up too much on things that are causing mast cell activation and the punching out of histamines? So with the sensitivities, remove high histamine foods and products. Okay, so foods, we're looking at aged cheeses, alcohol, spinach, tomatoes, leftovers are a big one. If you have leftovers, freeze them immediately. If you can't freeze them, you're not eating those leftovers. Somebody who doesn't have MCAS or lipedema can, not you. All right, so the charcuterie board, a histamine board, just right there. All right. Chemical sensitivities could be cleaning products, synthetic fabrics, new car smells, medications, NSAIDs, so non-steroidal anti-inflammatories are big ones. Some antibiotics are also mast cell destabilizers. All right, so make sure you know what you're taking and what they potentially could do. If you're not sure of that, get out everything you take, every supplement, every medication, get the name of the medication and type into Google vitamin B, D3, and mast cells. See what comes up. All right. Just know what you're taking and how it could potentially be affecting this if you think you have it. And the fun part is compression garments may contain chemicals that trigger MCAS. I know, right? So even the things that are good for us can be bad for us. So we've got to know what's what. So yeah, that's a tricky one. Okay, let's move on to heart palpitations. I get this sometimes. Now I know why. After digging into this and doing these slides up, I'm like, oh yeah, I experienced that. All right. So mast cells sit also directly on the heart tissue and the blood vessels. Um, when they release histamines and tryptases and other things like mediators like this, they can directly affect the heart rate and the heart rhythm. So because MCAS is also a circadian rhythm thing, so it's affected by how well our circadian rhythm is running. Um, it often occurs at night. So if you have palpitations after eating at night, often the mast cells, whatever you've eaten, will trigger that. All right. So if you're sitting there and you ate a half an hour ago and you can feel your heart, like it's not, if you've had this, you'll know what I mean. It's not a scary thing, but you can feel your heart beating, right? So uh, generally look to what you ate a half an hour ago. There'll be a trigger in that, and you've eaten it at night, which doesn't help, and your circadian rhythm is probably a little bit out as well. All right. So uh, when it comes to heart issues here, often you'll have heart tests and things like that. You'll come back with negative again, like the other, like the allergies. Nothing wrong with your heart structurally. That's how you know it's an MCAS problem, is because structurally they'll say, no, 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 there's nothing wrong with your heart. They'll do an ECG, they'll do all this of things. And I had an ECG for my last surgery, right? So they do one every time I have a surgery. So I had one in December and I had one a few weeks back. No problems with my heart. My heart is perfect, but yet I get this. So I know it's a mast cell problem. Okay. And mast cell activation syndrome also frequently occurs with POTS. So that's postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And that's where the heart rate surges whenever you stand. So lipedema, MCAS, and POTS often come together. All right. Okay. So let's go to the pain. Now, while we go, that's not an unusual symptom for lipedema. This is actually MCAS symptoms. So we might go, oh no, that's a lipedema symptom. No, no, no. But MCAS can also cause pain problems. So you've got like a double whammy on this one. So mast cells sit alongside nerve fibers throughout our connective tissue. So the activation of the mast cells can cause the pain, not just the fibrosis around the lipedema. Okay, I'm just like, oh my God, everything that we do here, if we've got this on top of the other thing, it's really hard to disentangle what belongs with what, right? And if you've got thyroid disease like I have, and then some of them come under that category as well, some of them fit under every single category. So it's really hard to figure out what's triggering what. But anyway, we still continue, we still try and figure out ourselves, right? I know I do. Okay. So apparently, though, it's not pain, it's just the amplification of the feeling of the pain. So it like feels much worse than somebody who didn't have lipedema, or somebody who, in this case, didn't have mast cell activation syndrome. So that doesn't help us, because if the pain feels painful, it's painful. Like, it doesn't matter whether it's in our head or not in our head, or it's amplified or not amplified, it hurts. Okay, that's the bottom line. And the pattern here with MCAS often overlaps with fibromyalgia. So I'm going to say there's a lot of people out there with fibromyalgia, and I haven't, in the research I've done so far on mast cell activation syndrome, so far I'm finding, and lipedema. I wonder how many people with fibromyalgia have been labeled as fibromyalgia, but it's actually potentially lipedema and mast cell activation syndrome all tangled up together. And they came up with fibromyalgia because they didn't understand these other things as a word, as the name of a syndrome. Not sure, but it's an interesting one to try and figure out if you're somebody with fibromyalgia. And I know that there's many of you that watch this, that follow me from thyroid school, that have fibromyalgia. So it would be an interesting exercise for you guys to do, to see uh, if some of the symptoms fit more under mast cell activation than they do under fibromyalgia. Might be worth a little looky. And here's another spot where, sometimes it can be good for you, sometimes it can be bad for you. Compression garments. When you have pains and sensitivities in your hands, the compressions can make that worse. So from what I understand, if you're that person, then often you can find it will depend on the weave of the compression and that kind of thing as to whether or not you can find it bearable. Sometimes you can desensitize yourself to it by wearing it for half an hour, then longer, then longer. But I've never experienced this, so I can't speak to how that feels or whether or not that's even a possibility of getting used to it. So if that's you, share in the comments and let other people know where you're at with compressions being a trigger in this respect. All right, mood instability. Okay. Um, what if mood instability and anxiety and all this kind of thing was actually caused by mast cell activation syndrome? That would put a whole new spin on it, right? So histamines are an excitatory neurotransmitter. So it puts the brain, the neurotransmitters in our brain go, tss, they have a little buzz, right? Much like MSG, gives you a little buzz inside your head and puts things on fire. It makes things an increased state of hyper arousal, but not always in a good way, right? It can cause the racing thoughts, anxiety, feeling on edge, just like this hyper vigilance in our brain. Um, and when it does that, it also triggers the release of adrenaline and cortisol. So we've got a sustained fight or flight that feels like a generalized anxiety disorder. So if you're on an anxiety medication, it would be an interesting thing to look into, because it's often misdiagnosed, and people are on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication. It doesn't mean the emotional pain's not real, but it could be caused not necessarily by you just, thinking life is pretty crap, but more from a syndrome that you're suffering, and that it's a physiological response in your body that potentially you can do something about, which to me would give me hope. If I was on that kind of a medication, I'd be like, oh, so I could potentially do something about this rather than just be on these medications and wonder why I'm feeling like this all the time. All right. So it doesn't mean that the emotional pain's not there. It just means that potentially you could stabilize your moods if you got on top of the histamine response. All right. Temperature, stress. Okay. So this is one of the most common triggers, and people don't realize it. And I sure didn't realize it. And this is the extremes of heat and cold and all the rest of it. Now, this is even just I live in Bangkok. It's very hot. You go outside, you go for a walk, it's stinking hot. You come back inside and you have your aircon on too low. That temperature stress of having to go from hot to cold. And we don't keep our aircon on like very low. We keep it at around 25, 26 degrees because we don't want to come in from outside and have that like really cold, that can cause all sorts of problems. So that temperature stress can trigger the histamine response, the mast cell activation in our body. Exercise can be a trigger because it creates heat in your body. It increases the blood flow, and that releases adrenaline all at once. So, although I'm not saying don't exercise, maybe pick exercises that aren't going to be quite so aggravating to the body. Maybe in the pool, that kind of thing might be better. And again, keep a trigger diary. Identify your patterns, right? If you go for a walk, if you go for a run, if you're a runner, any of those sorts of things, keep a diary. Say, oh, write down how you felt. Half an hour. I know it's a pain in the bum doing this sort of thing, but nobody else is going to figure this out for you. I say this all the time, right? It's up to us to figure out our own patterns and then present it to the people that can make a difference for us. It's sad, I know, but it's true. Okay, and finally, number 10, swelling. Now, we already have swelling in lipedema. Mast cells cause swelling in their own right because histamines, when they're released, cause vascular leakage, which causes swelling, right? So, this is why lipedema swelling, as well as normal swelling, can vary from day to day because it depends again on the amount of triggers that you've exposed yourself to during that day or the load. How high has that load got? And estrogen's a driver, remember, we've said that before. So, hormonal fluctuations can make it worse, that time of the month or menopause, perimenopause, all of that kind of thing. But treating MCAS, treating mast cell activation syndrome, can meaningfully reduce the swelling. And that's the main thing, right? It's like, oh, we can actually do something about this. All right. So, and hang on. Oh, try everything because you don't know what will work until you try it, right? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There we go. Um, all right, so that's where I'm at. That's what I found this week around mast cell activation syndrome. And I know that I can think of so many times now with all of those different, symptoms that I'm like, oh, that could have been mast cells firing off, releasing histamines, and it's a histamine issue. The vertigo that I had earlier in the year, different, and I do still get. I wouldn't say permanent vertigo like I did for a couple of, it was maybe a month earlier in the year. But every now and again, I'll have a moment where I sort of go, oh, there's like an echo of it in the background. And now, after doing this research this week, I'm like, okay, so now I know whenever I get that funny sort of backgroundy thing, I've had a histamine response. So now I've got to get more serious now that I've learned all these things about tracking what I'm having and what I'm not having, because it's not necessarily all the basic things that you think are not healthy. It's not that, because exercise can cause this problem, So it's actually just figuring out for you, if you've got mast cell activation syndrome or you think you do, what are your particular triggers? Because we'll all be different. I say this all the time. We're all different with what causes issues with ourselves, even though we might all have the same name of something or same banner of something, we have to always look at what personally affects us. It's a big effort, I know, and I think that's half the reason I do this kind of thing for my job is because it's like it makes me work on myself. So maybe like if you want to force yourself to do these things for yourself, start an Instagram page or start a whatever on your for you and share what you find out because it makes you research it, right? So I wouldn't be researching this if I didn't have this YouTube channel, not a chance. I would, but not nearly as deeply or to the understanding that I can share it and go, this is what I've learned. So that's, a lot of the reason I do this is because it holds me accountable to learn for myself. Oh, I need to do this or I need to do that. Okay. So that would be like my recommendation if you feel like you want to share something and you don't have to show your face. You don't have to just, a faceless Instagram account or something, whatever. I'm not a TikTok person, so maybe TikTok or whatever is a great idea if you want to learn more, but you just can't be bothered. If you're, sharing things that, because you know what, we're great at helping other people, aren't we? Awesome at it. So think of it as that way, as you're learning so that you can help other people. That's the way I look at it. I'm like, I'm learning all this so I can help you where you may not have had time to sit down and research all of this. So anyway, that's it for me. And I found a few things, and I'm going to be doing more videos for the next little while on Mast Cell Activation Syndrome because I'm trying to figure it out, like I just said. And chamomile tea is a natural antihistamine, vitamin C. So the next video, probably long form this week, will be all the natural antihistamines because there are a few that I had no idea about, like chamomile. So having a chamomile tea before I go to bed not only, helps me calm down, wind down, reduces cortisol, but also is a natural antihistamine and all of that kind of thing. You can tick most of those boxes. Yes, I'm going to say you probably do because I'm going to say it's hereditary, potentially. Anyone watching, that's my mama in the comments. And so, see, there's another thing. Check your family. Does your mother have these sorts of things? I'm going to say if you're here because you've got lipedema, your mum has lipedema. And do most of us have mast cell activation syndrome and we don't realize it? And that's just like I haven't seen the stats as to how many people with lipedema or how many, I say people now because there is like 1% of men that have it. How many have mast cell activation syndrome in a statistic perspective? I'm going to say it's starting to feel like it'd be a pretty high statistic. I'm almost feeling like it would be pretty unusual not to have mast cell activation syndrome if you've got lipedema, but I haven't done that research yet. But yeah, the next long form video I'll put up is chamomile tea. And I got this from a hotel, I think when we went to, I don't know, Penang or Vietnam. And I'll show you the tea bag. And I know tea bags, but it's actually got flowers, like real flowers in it. And it's a really nice one. So now I've got all over my hands. But so chamomile will not only reduce the histamines, it will lower your cortisol to help you sleep better. So we can all use that, right? Okay, that's it from me this week. If you want me to dig into anything specific around this, because this is just new for me, the mast cell activation syndrome, let me know in the comments. I love a good research, and I will head in that. Hello, Narelle. Definitely feel like I have this also triggers my lichen sclerosis. Oh, that's a horrible thing to have, but really increases lipedema, pain, and nodules. So lichen sclerosis is like an itchy thing. It's an itchy skin irritation, and apparently it's like one of the itchiest things that you can have, and you just want to rip your skin apart when you have it. Um, so that's an interesting one, Narelle. Um, what was I about to say about that? Hmm. It would be really interesting for you to track that and see if it's itchier on some days that you're eating high histamine foods or you've been touching chemicals or high, fragranced cleaning things or whatever. that would be a really interesting thing to track for you. Um, so, and I would try and separate the lichen sclerosis to the lipedema and just see, because the pain that we just spoke about could be the pain from the MCAS, which the MCAS could be exacerbating the lichen sclerosis. It's a tricky thing, right? It's so tricky to figure out, but definitely see if you can pull those aside. And I've got somebody you might be interested in tracking who goes to the emotions around this, and that is she is on Instagram. Hang on, I'm just putting it in the chat, and she had lichen sclerosis, and she cleared that because she works with emotions, right? So that's another level that I talk about, you know, mind, body, soul. It all counts, it all works. But Jin had lichen sclerosis and had it really badly. That's how I know what it is and how awful it must be for you. So check her out on Instagram and look up her story around that. She's on Instagram, YouTube, and all that sort of thing. And so she's on that. All right. That's it for me. Again, as I said, let me know if there's anything you want me to dig into, or if you have any further things to add around MCAS, because I'm on definitely the deep dive to that in the next few weeks, to so that I can learn more about it for me. And then I will, of course, share it with you as always. All right, everybody, have a great week, and I will see you all next Sunday night, 7 p.m. my time. Bye.